The crack of bones sounded louder than the engines, a sharp, sickening pop that stole the air from the cabin and replaced it with a scream no child should ever make at 30,000 feet. People turned. Some gasped. Others froze, unsure of what they'd just witnessed. In the wide leather seat of first class, 10-year-old Alia Carter crumpled against the window, tears streaking her cheeks as her arm hung at an impossible angle. Standing over her was a flight attendant, breath quick, eyes darting as if the moment itself had betrayed her. Minutes earlier, Alia had been smiling. It was her first time in first class. Her father, Captain Marcus Carter, had promised her this flight would be special. He was on reserve duty that day, riding as a passenger to reposition for another assignment, and he'd used his benefits to surprise his daughter. Alia pressed her nose to the glass, marveling at the clouds like mountains of light. She was quiet, careful, the kind of child who folded herself small to avoid being a problem. The challenge began with something tiny and human. Alia's seatbelt felt too tight. She shifted, tugging it gently, her elbow brushing the aisle as the cabin prepared for descent. The flight attendant, already tense from a long day and an overbooked cabin, snapped. She told Alia to sit still. Alia tried to explain, her voice barely above a whisper, that the belt hurt. The attendant heard defiance where there was none. When Alia reached again to adjust the belt, the attendant grabbed her arm. Hard. Too hard. The next second shattered everything. The cabin fell into chaos. Alia's mother, seated a row behind, rushed forward, her scream slicing through the stunned silence. Passengers shouted for help. Someone called for a doctor. The flight attendant backed away, hands trembling, repeating that the child had jerked, and it was an accident. But the arm told the truth. Marcus Carter had been asleep, lulled by the hum of the engines he knew so well. He woke to his daughter's scream, a sound that bypassed reason and went straight to instinct. He was on his feet before he understood why, pushing past stunned passengers, his heart pounding as he saw Alia's face twisted in pain. For a pilot trained to stay calm in emergencies, this was the greatest challenge of his life. He wanted to rage. He wanted to shout. He wanted to break something back. Instead, he knelt beside his daughter, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. He cradled her, careful not to move the arm, whispering that she was safe, that he was there. He met the flight attendant's eyes, not with anger, but with something colder. Recognition. Accountability. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of apologies and procedural language. The captain announced an expedited landing. Paramedics met them at the gate. Alia was rushed to the hospital, where X-rays confirmed a clean fracture that would heal, but not without weeks of pain and fear and questions no child should have to ask. Why did she hurt me? Did I do something wrong? Would it happen again? Those questions haunted Marcus more than any turbulence ever could. The airline moved quickly, at least on the surface. A representative visited the hospital with flowers and rehearsed concern. They promised an investigation. They used words like incident and misunderstanding. They never said the words Alia needed to hear. We were wrong. That was another challenge. Silence wrapped in politeness. Systems designed to protect themselves before protecting people. Marcus knew the industry from the inside. He knew how reports could be softened, how narratives could shift. He also knew the unspoken reality his daughter had collided with, the way black children were often seen as older, louder, more threatening than they were, the way authority, when unchecked, could turn cruel in an instant. He refused to let this become another quiet settlement and a non-disclosure agreement. While Alia slept with her arm in a cast covered in get-well notes, Marcus worked. He filed a formal report not as an angry father, but as a captain invoking safety protocols. He requested cabin footage. He contacted the flight attendants union and the airline's safety board. He documented everything, from the initial confrontation to the inconsistent statements that followed. The airline pushed back. They cautioned him about conflicts of interest. They suggested he take some time before escalating. Friends warned him he could be risking his career. That was the hardest challenge of all, choosing between personal safety and moral duty. Marcus remembered the oath he'd taken as a pilot, to protect passengers, to put safety above all else. He remembered teaching Alia that doing the right thing mattered even when it cost you something. He could not ask his daughter to be brave if he was not. So he kept going. Other passengers came forward. One had recorded part of the interaction. Another wrote a statement describing how calmly Alia had behaved. A pediatric nurse on board detailed the force required to cause such a fracture. Piece by piece, the truth assembled itself. When the story reached the media, it ignited a fire the airline could not contain. The headline traveled fast, not because of outrage alone, but because of the quiet dignity of a child who had been hurt and a father who refused to let it be erased. Public pressure mounted. Regulators took notice. The airline grounded several aircraft temporarily, citing the need to retrain crews on de-escalation and child safety while the investigation concluded. Flights were cancelled. Schedules unraveled. Executives appeared on camera, suddenly fluent in remorse. Behind the scenes, Marcus faced his own turbulence. He was placed on administrative leave, pending review. The implication hung heavy, but he held steady, supported by colleagues who finally spoke up about similar incidents they'd witnessed and ignored. Alia struggled in her own ways. She woke from nightmares where hands grabbed her again. She flinched when strangers moved too quickly. Her challenge was learning that the world could still be safe. Marcus sat with her every night, listening. He never rushed her fear away. He told her that her feelings made sense. He told her that what happened was not her fault. He told her that her voice mattered. Weeks later, the airline released its findings. The flight attendant was terminated for excessive force and violation of protocol. The airline admitted wrongdoing. They agreed to sweeping changes, mandatory bias training, child-specific handling policies, body cameras for cabin crews during conflicts, and an independent review board that included passenger advocates. The grounding had cost them millions. Marcus was reinstated with a public apology. He accepted it not as a victory, but as a step. Alia returned to school with her cast freshly removed, her arm stiff but healing. On the first day back, she stood in front of her class and told her story in her own words. Her voice shook, but it did not break. When she finished, the room was silent, then filled with applause that surprised her into a smile. She learned that day that pain could be transformed into power. Months later, Marcus and Alia boarded another plane. This time, economy class. No upgrades, no fanfare, just a window seat and a sky still full of clouds. Marcus watched his daughter buckle her seatbelt, her hands steady. When she looked up at him, there was fear there, but also trust. As the plane lifted, Alia leaned, her head on his shoulder. "Daddy," she said softly, "you didn't ground the airline because you were mad, did you?" He smiled, eyes on the horizon. "No," he said, "I did it because you mattered. And because everyone else does too." The engines roared, carrying him forward, not away from what had happened, but beyond it. And in that flight, in that shared silence above the clouds, a message traveled farther than any headline ever could. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to protect others even when your hands are shaking, and that sometimes, the most powerful way to change the world is simply to refuse to let injustice fly.